This is a pretty beat up old book. Looks almost as old as some of you. Like it's got that library tape and it doesn't even stick up here on top anymore, and the pages are yellowed, and it might be one of those original 1948 books, right? It's easy to overlook. It's got great truth inside of it. It's the story of Thidwick, the big-hearted moose. And up at Lake Winnebago, the far northern shore, lives a huge herd of moose, about 60 or more, and they all go around in a big happy bunch looking for nice, tender moose moss to munch. Do we have a there you go. There they all are. And the last one in line, way back at the back, that's Thidwick. And as he walked along, he saw a bingo bug sitting. The bug called out, "Hey, it's such a long road, it's such a hot day. Would you mind if I rode on your horns for a way?" "Of course not," smiled Thidwick, the big-hearted moose. "I'm happy my antlers can be of some use." Well, an hour or so later, the bug heard a squeak, and he heard a small voice of a tree spider speak. I say, said the spider, "you've got a fine place. Do you think he would mind?" "Hop aboard," laughed the bug, "and I think that you'll find that the moose won't object. He's the big-hearted kind." "Hey, what goes on up there?" Now, he's not just yelling about those two, because in the meantime, along came a Zinazuba bird. And that Zinazuba bird also found a space, using the hair off of Thidwick's head to make a nest. But a host, above all, must be kind to his guest. But he doesn't seem quite happy, does he? "Me, my wife," said the bird. "I was married last night. And perhaps, by the way, I should mention to you that her uncle is coming to live with you, too. You're a very fine host, so I knew you'd be willing." Check out the uncle. A woodpecker. Started in drilling. All of Thidwick's friends shouted, "Get rid of those pests!" "I would, but I can't," sobbed poor Thidwick there. "Guess." "Guess indeed," his friends answered, and all of them frowned. "If those are your guests, we don't want you around." Now the big friendless moose walked alone and forlorn with 4 great big woodpecker holes in his horn, but they soon filled up. "Bring your nuts, bring your wife, bring your children as well." And on we go, filling up the horns more and more and more. Bobcat, turtle, what would you do? But now it was winter, and that wasn't easy, for moose moss gets scarce when the weather gets freezy. And all of Thidwick's friends swam away in a bunch to the south of the lake, where there's moose moss to munch. He'd starve if he'd stay here. He'd have to go too. He stepped in the water, then oh, what a fuss! "Stop!" screamed his guest. "You can't do this to us." "Well, let's have a vote then." "Aye," shouted Thidwick, but when he was done, he lost 11-1. And they're all happy about the victory, right? They look it that way. But Thidwick looks a bit different, doesn't he? But they ask in some more. No. Poor Thidwick sank down with a groan to his knees, and then came something that made his heart freeze. Bullets came zinging past Thidwick's face. Guns were bang-binging all over the place. "Get that moose! Get that moose!" Thidwick heard a voice call. "We must get his head for the Harvard Club wall." Thidwick took to his heels with that load on his head. With 500 pounds on his horns, the moose fled. up canyon, off cliff, over wild rocky trail, with bullets bouncing around him like hail. That's the stuff that falls from the sky. I'm not trying to curse this guy. Don't you love that picture? There he is running. I felt that way, haven't you, sometimes? Then finally they had him. Because of those pests, he had run out of luck. Because of those guests on his horns, he was stuck. He gasped. He felt faint, and the whole world grew fuzzy. Thidwick was finished completely. Or was he? Today was the day Thidwick happened to know. Today was the day that old horns come off so that new ones can grow. Keep them, they're yours. As for me, I shall take myself to the far distant side of the lake. His old horns today are where you knew they would be. His guests are still on them, stuffed as they should be. Isn't that a great picture? I love Thidwick. Thidwick is just a fun guy. Here he is. He's living out this life of, you know, that he thinks he's supposed to live. He's supposed to live. He's doing a great job of it. And one by one, he gets overwhelmed. And, you know, the story is a story about two different dynamics. It's that thing about codependency, which Thidwick, let's just admit it, was a little codependent. Right? And this thing of self-centeredness that sometimes takes advantage of codependency. And we have to sit somewhere in that space in between, somewhere in that space that says, how do we walk faithfully? How do we walk according to what God has placed in our hearts? And it's not always simple, is it? Because let me tell you, that if you are relatively liberal, progressive, and you have a conservative friend, or several of them, at least one of them thinks that you are Thidwick. And that you have let too many people in your horns. And that you are doing things that feel to them like you are codependent. You know that? You know that's true about you? It doesn't mean you're wrong, but it means that you got a problem with that person who looks at you differently, right? And you're having to figure out how to say, wait, but I've got to let this person stay here, even when that person sometimes is heavy and is weighing you down. And even when you feel some of the struggles of that codependent side of you, and even then when you want to let go, you're there saying, but wait, this person needs this. That bug needed a place to stay, right? And maybe all the other animals did, but it gets heavy sometimes in those horns, doesn't it? How many have felt that, the weight of that? The difficulty of somehow walking there, especially when all your other moose friends are busy saying, well, we're not helping. I think we just get rid of those pests. We think you're stupid. Right? And haven't you felt that? Haven't you heard that from friends? I know Fran has, because she chairs our outreach committee, and she's got a big set of horns. Right? And she does lots of stuff. But the reality is that when you take this step, when you do these things, when you're acting that way, it doesn't always go over perfectly. Joseph found himself in that same kind of spot in a lot of ways. Do you remember Joseph from last week? There he was at the bottom of the well. There he was being sold by his brothers into Egypt. And the story goes on and it goes through all kinds of stuff, and there's great stories in there. But basically, Joseph rises from that spot at the bottom of the pit to where suddenly the Pharaoh puts him in charge of the granaries. Goes from having nothing and being rejected by his brothers to having power. To having what he needs to be able to affect his world. And part of what he's doing in charge of those granaries is he's saving up all the food because he knows that there's going to be a drought, and that drought comes, and it hits hard in Egypt, and it hits hard back where those brothers are at. And after a while, those brothers are sent by their father to come and ask Egypt, because they've heard that Egypt has lots of grain, lots of food. They didn't hear it was because of their brother that they rejected. They didn't know that it was the brother that they would come to, and that brother would have control. In fact, when they got there, they didn't even recognize their brother. But Joseph knew. And haven't you wanted to be there? Where somebody who hurt you, somebody who rejected you, somebody who pushed you away, now you had all the power. Now you could. Haven't you wanted to be there? And power is something that draws our hearts mightily. And we want to use it. But the reading in your bulletin, right at the top, did you read that? If you didn't read it, read it. It's by Teilhard de Chardin. And I want you to, at some point or another, just read that and internalize what it says. Because it's an amazing thing. And right in the middle it says this: only love has the capacity to transform the individual parts of our lives and our world into a living humanness. I'm sure you all know what that means, don't you? Chardin was a brilliant man, and he sometimes made up words to be able to speak what it is that he thought. And he didn't always explain exactly what those words meant. But this one means a living, growing up, of a coming together of things. A community that's more than what it has been. And only love can do that. And we often try to use power to do that. We try to build our communities by marshaling our forces together and having more votes than you. We try to do it with power in all different kinds of ways, but only love will truly make that transformation happen. And all the attempts we make to try to build a true community the other way will fail. When I first came to a Methodist church, it was a little Sunrise church up in the north side of Phoenix, and my pastor was a man named Stephen. Stephen became a good friend of mine. And I loved talking with him and being there and hearing him. And one of the things I loved about him is he was a singer. And probably published 5 albums. He was a great singer, and I loved hearing his stuff. And one of his songs was a song called Can't Be Heaven. And he talks about, it's an autobiographical song where he talks about himself and his friend named Paul. And it says, it starts off by saying, footballs, baseball, basketballs, that was Paul and Steve. Each played each game until the bitter end. Turns out they became the best of friends. But they weren't alike. They were very different. Steve grew up and discovered religion and followed that path and became that pastor, right? That I knew. Paul grew up and was mostly bored. All he found were questions without answers. See, Paul was holding out for that burning bush, that something that says this is exactly the right way, and it just wasn't coming. And so Stephen says, these 2 friends gave life to different answers. And then he has the most remarkable line. He says, they laughed and cried, they laughed and loved and cried, grew old and died. And Stephen gets up there to the pearly gates, and he looks around for his friend Paul because he wants to say, I told you so. Doesn't see Paul, and so he goes up to the angel, and he calls him the angel concierge. And he says, where's my childhood friend named Paul? And the angel pushed a button on the wall. And the window opens up, and there's Paul outside the wall wandering around. And the angel said, let's celebrate, Paul's made his bed, but you got saved. Come enjoy the rich rewards of faith. Stephen stood, apologized, said, angel, this ain't personal at all. This place is dear. I like to hear your friends sing in the hall. But for me, it can't be heaven without Paul. We'll be outside playing basketball. Please call me if you change your mind about Paul. If God esteems integrity, there's a place for doubt to be standing next to those who do believe. Paul would not believe till he believed. Isn't that a great song? All of us have those people in our life that are somewhere different than us, and the tendency that we want to have is to force them to be where we are. But they need to be where they are. I told you that Stephen was only my pastor for a very short time, because after I joined that church in June, and I've been going since January, 6 months later, he and the people in the church had a disagreement. And essentially he was kicked out. They had all these reasons why Stephen shouldn't stay there. All these reasons why something should be different. But Joni and I couldn't let the relationship die. And so when we got married, a couple years after that, we couldn't think of not inviting Stephen back to sing at our wedding. And he had to face all of our friends there at the church who had also rejected him from that church. And somehow that church had to become a place where maybe, possibly, a coming together could happen. And churches sometimes are good at that. But not always, are they? And yet that's what we're supposed to be, isn't it? A space where broken hearts can come back together. Where spirits that have been beaten and battered in whatever way can somehow come back into reconciliation. Where people who have been at odds with one another can somehow get past that dividing wall between them. We didn't know what it would do to our friends. We just knew we couldn't celebrate that day without our friend Stephen there with us. And we must live out our truth every single day. If we are Thidwicks, we need to carry all those animals on our horns, even though our friends say, get rid of the pests. We have to live out how it is that God is moving in us, but then we have to figure out how to live with the consequences. Because we don't live out our truth regardless of the consequences. We live out our truth believing in something greater than just those consequences. We live out our truth trying to discover how to be more than just the timid souls we could be. Rumi said this, "The way of love is not a subtle argument. The door there is devastation." When I was in my late 20s, all through the time that I was an elementary school teacher, I was very involved in the Teachers Association. And at one point I went with the board of directors up to the Arizona Education Association, up to a retreat. We had someone who led us through all those kinds of retreat types of activities. You've done them, right? The trust each other type of things and get past all these things. And I remember one point from that retreat. This was it. If you want to truly be in community, you have to go into chaos. As Rumi said, into devastation. And our tendency at that place is to retreat backwards into pseudo-community where we treat each other nice. Where we're happy with each other, but we never go deep. And true community goes deep. True community goes beyond the niceties and goes into those places that are harsh sometimes, that are devastating sometimes, that figure out how to let go of some of those things and how to let that chaos change us into something more than what we've been before. I love some of the things that President Obama is doing right now because he's stepping into chaos. I understand why we don't want to and why we have politically some people who ask him not to step closer to Iran or to Cuba. But if you keep a distance between you, you never can have relationship. To have true relationship, you have to step closer. You have to step into the chaos that happens in the midst of that stepping closer. Buddha said, there are three things that matter. How much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of what is not meant for you. How much you loved, how gently you lived, how gracefully you let go. We have to remember in every moment of chaos, there is still love possible. Because in that moment of stepping close, in that moment of confrontation, in that moment of challenge of who you are now, it won't seem like it. And you have to trust beyond just yourself. All of us have to trust beyond just ourselves and into what it is that God is going to do. Because that's what we believe in. That somehow in the midst of that, God is present. Didwick had to live out this life that seemed exactly what he shouldn't be. His friends saw how stupid it was. He felt the weight of how hard it was. How difficult it is to figure it out. We have to look hopefully to a solution that's larger than just us. In the last few months, President Obama was in a press conference when he began to talk about a friend of his who was suffering with cancer. The people of Oklahoma, he said, have been well served by this country doctor from Muskogee over the past 9 years. That country doctor was a man named Tom Coburn, who some people call the godfather of the Tea Party. President Obama and Senator Coburn came to the Senate at the same time. In 2004, they were freshman senators together, and they came to love each other, to admire each other, even though they were as divided as you could be on the political spectrum. That country doctor from Muskogee wasn't something that a lawyer from Illinois, from Chicago, would typically run into. And yet they found each other and saw each other and became the best of friends. And Tom Coburn, in an interview just a little while ago, said this: "My relationship with Barack Obama isn't based on my political philosophy or his. It's based on the fact that he's a genuinely very smart, nice guy. I just love him as a man. You don't have to be the same to be friends. Matter of fact, the interesting friendships are the ones that are divergent. Like our call to awareness said, we have to learn to listen to each other. We have to learn to hear beyond what it is that would drive us apart. We need to give spaces to each other, truly hear each other's heart. We have to do that with one purpose, to let that other person open their heart. Joseph stood there with all the power in his hands. He could do whatever he wanted to those 10 brothers who had rejected him, who had pushed him away, who had told him, essentially, you're worth nothing to us. He stood there with all the power. And then he wept. He wept so loudly that all the Egyptians heard it. All of the house of Pharaoh heard it. And he looked at his brothers and he said, I am Joseph, your brother. Come closer to me. Grab a hand and let God in. Amen? Amen. Let's stand and sing together.